On this Sunday night, the start of a long goodbye. Queen Elizabeth's coffin starts the journey to London.
We want to thank the Queen for everything she's done for us.
The crowds turning out to see her funeral cortege as it travels through Scotland. Our interview with Canada's High Commissioner to the UK. You've just come back from the palace. You met the new king for the first time. What was that like? What the royal transition means for Canada. And a runaway victory for Pierre Poilievre.
What you see is what you get. There were a lot of Canadians that supported the convoy.
Why the new Conservative leader is pledging not to pivot to the centre.
Global National with Donna Friesen, reporting tonight from London.
The beginning of her final journey, Queen Elizabeth II's coffin leaving what's widely known to be her favourite place, Balmoral Castle in the Scottish Highlands, making a 6-hour journey to Edinburgh. Thousands of mourners lining the route, even along rural roads in Scotland, and then crowding into the city to pay their respects. Princess Anne, the Queen's only daughter, travelled with the funeral cortege, and as her mother's coffin was carried by pallbearers into the palace of Holyrood House, she curtsied, maintaining royal protocol even in grief. And outside Buckingham Palace in London and Windsor Castle, people keep coming, people of all ages, many carrying flowers and other tributes to the Queen. They're taking the time to say farewell to the only monarch most of them have ever known, to be part of an historic moment. Good evening from London. 3 days after her death, this country has begun to formally say goodbye to Queen Elizabeth. Her coffin will remain in Edinburgh for people to pay their respects there before it's flown here to London. The size of the crowds turning up already and the volume of flowers gives you some sense of how many want to pay tribute to her. Our Europe Bureau Chief Crystal Goomansingh has been watching the funeral cortege and the reaction. Crystal?
Donna, in just over a week's time, dignitaries from around the world will be here at Westminster Abbey to attend a state funeral. But today, it was regular people in cities and towns around Scotland who were paying their respects, and they came out by the thousands. The Royal Standard of Scotland covering Her Majesty's oak coffin. The first sightings bringing home the reality of the Queen's death.
She's been loyal, she's been dignified, she's been kind and compassionate.
Balliter is just a few minutes away from Balmoral Castle. People in this town felt close to the Queen, and not just because of the proximity.
It's been such an incredibly sad week, knowing the Queen has passed.
Some along the procession route saddled up, knowing how much the Queen loved horses. A wartime mechanic said to have been able to drive any vehicle. She may have also delighted in some bringing their tractors. Princess Anne in the procession of royal vehicles, making the drive from Balmoral to Edinburgh with her mother one final time. Among those lining the route and leaving gifts, young children, many just getting to know the woman with the jewels and handbag.
We was going to put the flowers down.
And who are the flowers for?
The Queen.
We want to thank the Queen for everything she's done for us.
Yeah. And we've laid some flowers, put flowers down, and just want to show our gratefulness to her.
The 6-hour journey by car allowed tens of thousands of people from across Scotland the opportunity to honor the Queen without having to travel to England. Her death at Balmoral Castle on September 8th triggered an alternative set of plans, which the Queen herself helped to craft, and included a night at the Royal Scottish residence, the Palace of Holyrood House.
We felt we just had to come and pay our respects to the Queen.
The Royal Mile leading to Holyrood House packed with people ushering the coffin carrying the Queen into the protective gates in the palace that has sheltered royals going back more than 500 years. Monday afternoon, there will be another procession as the Queen's coffin is moved to St. Giles Cathedral. King Charles III and the Queen Consort Camilla will follow by foot. There, the coffin will lay in rest for 24 hours, giving more people in Scotland the opportunity to pay their respects. Donna?
Crystal Goomansingh, thanks. The Queen's funeral will be held at Westminster Abbey behind me, and we will bring you live coverage of the funeral on Monday, September 19th. A busy day for the new king with a string of formal meetings and introductions with representatives from across the Commonwealth today. Thousands of people lined the road to Buckingham Palace, cheering and waving as King Charles III was driven by. The king was followed by his wife, Camilla, the Queen Consort, who traveled in a separate vehicle. King Charles held a series of meetings today with the UK's Foreign Secretary, the Commonwealth General Secretary, and representatives from across the Commonwealth, including Canada's High Commissioner to the UK. I'll have an interview with Ralph Goodale coming up just a little bit later. The Prime Minister of the Caribbean nation of Antigua and Barbuda says he'll call for a referendum on removing King Charles as head of state. Minutes after signing a document confirming Charles III's status as the new king, Gaston Brown said that within 3 years, he will push for a referendum on becoming a republic. The Caribbean country is one of 14 nations outside Britain to retain King Charles as their head of state. Some other countries have signaled their intention to reconsider the role of the monarchy too, though Australia's Prime Minister today ruled out having a referendum on the issue there within the next 4 years. So what lies ahead for the monarchy in Canada? Well, I had a chat with Canada's High Commissioner to the UK just after he came back from meeting the new king at the Palace. That's coming up just a little bit later. First, Farah Nasser in Toronto has the rest of the day's news.
Thanks, Donna. Coming up, the Conservatives' populist pick, how the Liberals are hoping to use Pierre Poilievre's right-wing anti-establishment message against him. Multiple fires are burning around BC and south of the border in Oregon, Washington, and California, filling the air with a thick blanket of smoke. 2 fires are burning in the Fraser Valley, just east of Metro Vancouver, while an evacuation order has been issued for the town of Hudson's Hope in northeastern BC. An air quality advisory is in place for the Fraser Valley and Vancouver, where the smoke is so thick that the city's air quality was ranked the worst in the world today. That's according to the World Air Quality Index. Last night, Pierre Poilievre was voted in as the new leader of His Majesty's loyal opposition. Poilievre ran a right-wing populist campaign centered on freedom and won the Conservative leadership contest in convincing fashion with 68% on the first ballot. But as our chief political correspondent David Akin reports, the very message that won Poilievre so much support is the very message his opponents will be trying to use against him.
Tonight begins the journey to replace an old government that costs you more and delivers you less with a new government that puts you first.
Among the 338 ridings in the country, Pierre Poilievre won all but 8. He won the support of red Tories, libertarians, free marketers, social conservatives. Every faction in his party came to his flag.
Now, today, we are one party serving one country.
He won with a campaign that raged against what he called the country's elites. Elites at the Bank of Canada, in the mainstream media, in public health labs, but most of all, in the Trudeau government.
I think the Liberals are probably a little worried. This is a united Conservative movement, and it's a movement that has obviously grown. Poilievre has done a very good job of bringing in new people to the party.
We will restore Canada's promise in a country where it doesn't matter who you love, or if your name is Smith or Singh, Martin or Mohammed, Chang or Charles.
And while Prime Minister Justin Trudeau did call Poilievre Saturday night to congratulate him, Liberals were quick to say Poilievre is not a uniter, but a polarizing divider.
Mr. Poilievre chooses to take a different approach, or to be a divisive, polarizing figure and try and paralyze Parliament. We don't think Canadians will be impressed or warm to that approach.
Liberals say Poilievre's support for last winter's Freedom Convoy in Ottawa is a flaw. But Poilievre supporters say no, that's not a bug. It's a feature.
I think with Pierre, what you see is what you get. There were a lot of Canadians that supported the convoy, and if not specifically the convoy, the ideals that what they espoused in terms of being against lockdowns.
Poilievre will get right to work. The new leader of His Majesty's loyal opposition will meet with his 119 MP caucus Monday morning. Farah.
David Akin in Ottawa. Thank you, David. In Saskatchewan, the first funerals are underway for victims of last weekend's mass stabbing on the James Smith Cree Nation and the community of Weldon. But there is anything but closure there. As the police investigation continues, there are now calls for a public inquiry into the tragedy, with many questions on how it all unfolded and why. Mike Armstrong has more.
It appeared to be almost a painful admission for police. Just hours after suspect Miles Sanderson died in police custody, the head of the Saskatchewan RCMP said even though more than 100 officers are working on the case, Sanderson's death likely means the attacks and the reason for them may never be fully understood.
Unfortunately, now that Miles is deceased, we may never have an understanding of that motivation.
Now, the other thing Sanderson's death means is there won't be a trial. That would have meant evidence and testimony, a degree of transparency that may have helped the public deal with what happened.
In the absence of a criminal trial,
legal expert Archie Kaiser says the tragedy has some parallels to the 2020 Portapique tragedy in Nova Scotia. Both were unfathomable in terms of the loss of life, and in both cases the perpetrators were killed. There was no trial. The Nova Scotia government resisted an inquiry at first, but is now holding a mass casualty commission. Saskatchewan, Kaiser says, should consider something similar.
It's difficult to see how there can be a full examination of all of the events and the things that led to them without a proper public inquiry.
There are multiple investigations and reviews underway into different aspects of what happened in Saskatchewan and what led to it. Police are looking at the attacks. The parole board is reviewing the decision to grant Sanderson statutory release, letting him out of prison early. And Sanderson's death while in RCMP custody is being looked at by the Saskatoon Police Service and a civilian-led organization. The Serious Incident Response Team was only recently created as oversight on crimes involving police.
It is quite new, only just about a year old. This will be very much almost an acid case for this new body to prove to the public that it has got the ability to do these things independently without police interference.
One of the big issues that led to the Portapique inquiry was the police response during that attack. There hasn't been as much criticism in the Saskatchewan case, with observers saying the RCMP seemed to have learned from their mistakes.
We're hearing lots of information about what happened.
The head of the Canadian Prison Law Association says a broad and expensive inquiry isn't needed. Instead, Tom Engel wants a focused look at the lack of support Sanderson appears to have gotten in prison and on parole. Correctional Services Canada, he says, isn't doing enough for rehabilitation.
This is a serious problem, and we probably won't get to the root of that problem without a public inquiry.
Now, Engel does say transparency may be an issue in those reviews. Police forces in Canada, he says, are reluctant to release things like dashcam videos that may help the public better understand what happened. In the U.S., he says the dashcam videos from the cruisers in Sanderson's arrest likely would have already been released. Instead, in Canada, the public will likely never see them. Mike Armstrong, Global News, Regina.
And there is some help for those struggling from the tragedy and want to reach out. You can call the Hope for Wellness helpline or Crisis Services Canada at the numbers on your screen. Ahead, turning point in the war. Russian forces flee a strategic city, allowing Ukraine's army to make giant gains. Russia's response next. To Ukraine now, where a multi-pronged counteroffensive by Ukrainian forces is swiftly taking back large chunks of territory from Russian occupiers. In a Saturday address, President Volodymyr Zelensky says Russia's army is showing its back as Ukraine makes rapid progress reclaiming towns and cities in the Kharkiv region. Its military says it has recaptured some 3,000 square kilometers. Meanwhile, despite much evidence of equipment and weapons being left behind in what appears to be a quick retreat, officials in Moscow claim their withdrawal was planned. The last reactor of Europe's largest nuclear plant in Ukraine has now been shut off to avert disaster while fighting continues nearby. Shelling cut off the Zaporizhzhia plant from the power grid last week, raising fears of a possible meltdown with its cooling systems relying only on emergency power. But late Saturday, it managed to reconnect just long enough to initiate a shutdown. The plant's operators say this is the safest state as the ongoing conflict makes it too risky to operate. International aid is finally trickling into Pakistan's flood-ravaged regions. Today, 2 more U.S. military planes arrived, loaded with 35 tons of food and first aid supplies. Months of deadly monsoon rain has destroyed homes, washed away an entire year's crops, and made clean drinking water scarce. The floods have killed almost 1,400 people. It's estimated 33 million more are now displaced and dealing with hunger and rising risk of waterborne diseases. And in the U.S., poignant ceremonies were held today as Americans marked 21 years since the 9/11 attacks.
21 years ago, 21 years, and we still kept our promise. Never forget.
President Joe Biden speaking at the Pentagon, where one of the hijacked planes killed nearly 200 people that day. Of course, there were also ceremonies in New York to honor the victims of the devastating World Trade Center attacks. Nearly 3,000 people died in the terror attacks in 2001. Next, arriving directly from the palace, Canada's High Commissioner to the UK discusses his meeting with the King today. We're back to London with Donna right after this short break.
You're watching Global National.
Welcome back to London. Canada's Prime Minister, the Governor-General, and the High Commissioner to the UK, Ralph Goodale, are invited to the Queen's funeral on September 19th. There may be others, too. The final guest list is still being worked on. I met Mr. Goodale earlier today on his way from meeting the new King, along with representatives from other Commonwealth countries. You've just come back from the palace. You met the new King for the first time. What was that like?
Well, there was a profound sense of history in the room. So the King was there and the Queen Consort. This event has never happened in the last 70 years. One era turning to another era. A dominant personality, much loved in Queen Elizabeth, is gone. A new king has taken over. So history is changing, and being a part of that change of history was one of the emotions in the room. Another, obviously, was grief and mourning for Queen Elizabeth.
This is a big burden for the new King Charles to take on. He's lost his mother. He's also taking on this huge role, as you say, from a woman who was so much loved, had so much respect. What sense did you get from him personally today?
It's very personal. He has lost his mother. Anybody who's gone through that experience knows how tough that is. You feel a bit orphaned. And of course, he's lost both of his parents in the course of the last year and a bit.
Yeah.
So it's got to be unsettling, disorienting, and still in the grieving process, he has to do it very much in public. The pressures have to be enormous, the stresses and the strains, but he certainly leaves you with the impression that he is ready for the job. We talked a lot about his recent visit to Canada. He was there in the spring, a very busy agenda, and there were many components to it, but two in particular: his connection with the Ukrainian diaspora in Canada at this critical time, and his connections, many of them, with Indigenous communities. And clearly there, I think he has a very real sense of how important truth, reconciliation, and healing is to the future of Canada. And the role of the monarchy in particular. Those treaties were signed with the Crown, not with any particular government, with the Crown.
It's a special relationship.
A very special relationship, and now it's him. And I think certainly he gave me the impression he understands that. He is intensely interested in it, and he wants to be helpful.
Many people say the monarchy will not be the same without the Queen. Do you think, can you make the case for why it continues to matter for Canada, if it does continue to matter?
Well, undoubtedly, it will not be the same as the monarchy of Elizabeth II. So when that powerful personality moves aside and disappears from the scene, clearly things will change. But The issues I think Canadians need to look at is, do we really want to reopen a constitutional hassle, because it does involve constitutional change? Is that a productive discussion to have at a time where the existing apparatus actually works pretty well in terms of dealing with the things that a monarchy has to deal with? And if you're going to change, then to what? What is the alternative that is going to be better? Maybe the model in the United States? Maybe not.
Mr. Goodale, thank you so much.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Earlier today, I took a walk through Green Park to the mall that leads to Buckingham Palace, and there is a steady stream of thousands of people, many bringing flowers, even marmalade sandwiches. That's a nod to the skit the Queen did for the Jubilee with Paddington Bear. So many people loved that. There are messages like, "Thank you for everything, rest in peace." And my favorite, this card showing the Queen's corgis running from the gates of heaven to greet her. That is Global National for this Sunday. I'm Donna Friesen. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.